Welcome again to another very special episode of Making the Rounds. If you just saw us a couple hours ago, we're sorry we're back. Now we're going to, the play-in stuff is over, and we get to the good stuff that everyone likes to complain about, and North America is no longer in the play-in because Riot specifically promoted Vietnam so that North America wouldn't have to play the play-in. I don't know if that's true, but it's a plausible
Is that the rumor?
theory. I don't know. I'm just it's a plausible theory. The important thing is that why would you watch Emily and Kelsey's Making the Rounds MSI group stage previews when you can watch Euphoria or what is the North American show? The Dive. Yes, there you go. When you can watch Euphoria or The Dive or any other manner of more entertaining people, because obviously we are monotone and we talk randomly about stuff and we don't provide overlays of game stuff that's happening or anything entertaining. I'm ugly, etc. But why? Why would you watch Making the Rounds? Well, we actually watch the other regions, so that's a reason. Okay. I'm not saying that Riotcasters and teams don't watch other regions, but they do not spend as much or devote as much time to watching as many separate regions as Making the Rounds does, and this is how we have differentiated ourselves, and this is why you would watch it, okay?
AKA, we're crazy enough to watch all of China and Korea.
Exactly. In order to make this entertaining, I thought we would open with what to you is like a really big meta discrepancy or something like this that would differentiate different regions from each other. So since you've probably watched way more Flash Wolves and LMS than I have this split overall, we'll start with that and I'll let you kind of take the reins of what can we expect from Flash Wolves that would make them very different from the other teams in terms of like how they see the game and what they're doing differently.
So for those who watched the last episode we did, this is going to sound a bit repetitive, okay. But I think what does differentiate the Flash Wolves, especially in this meta, is their attention to bot side and how they play around sword art in an engaged support meta. So for those, it's not going to be a complete one-to-one comparison, but if you look at some of the things that, if you watch a lot of Korea, if you look at some of the things that the Afrika Freaks do in terms of how they rotate Tucson around and how he initiates team fights for the team, Sword Art is that, but even better with better bot side vision control. And I think in a meta that is a lot more bot side focused, especially with scaling AD carries and also a lot of attention to dragon control, I think you definitely will see the Flash Wolves continue to have kind of a strong early game when they play around bot side, and that's something that we saw from them in the LMS after they kind of figured stuff out. They had a rocky start actually when they were integrating Mujin onto the team and kind of swapping over to Hanabi as their top lane starter. And I know your thing with Flash Wolves is that they don't have as strong of a mid-jungle duo in terms of moving from Karsa and Maple to Mujin and Maple. But I do think that something we saw consistently from them in the LMS is just that they have this peerless focus on bot side, and what they're able to do because of Sword Art's vision, because of Sword Art's roaming, is ridiculously impressive. So if they're going to win against other teams in this meta, I think it will be through that vision control and also just unlocking Sword Art to be able to focus his attention either on laning with Betty or usually elsewhere, showing up in lanes, getting down vision for Mujin. And also once those first turrets are down, you'll find him rotating for picks as well.
I think in a tournament where of the major regions, most people are talking about the ADs, right? Most people are really highlighting the ADs as like you have pretty much objectively the best AD carry in each region showing up to
except for EVOS.
I'm saying like of the major region teams.
Yeah.
And you have objectively like the best AD carry representing their major region. I would say that we're going to see a lot of bot side centric play, but I would say that what distinguishes Flash Wolves is they play around their support, if that makes sense. Their objective is to get the push on bot so that Sword Art is free to control the jungle, is free to control the mid lane. So I would say that that is the major difference that we would see here, and since it's like kind of a borderline meta in terms of support setups, and I actually talked to Raz a little bit about this because he's been on the desk, and even though you saw on 8.7 a big nerf to the initial health on the resolve tree, so a lot of people hypothesized we'd see more, mage supports.
Yeah.
You get a lot out of, like, Camille is still a very big pick. You have the ability to play, like, a lot of sideline champions because, again, of the resolve nerf, you're seeing more, like, carry-oriented tops as well. Because of that, I think that Tahm Kench will remain in priority. Tahm Kench also does really well into a lot of mage matchups, just with his ability to Q harass and like the way his passive stacks extremely easily. The fact that he opens up the AD pool really, really easily, and he counters side lane comms. So Tahm Kench will remain kind of really high priority, and Braum, because of his ability to control like mid lane push, in mid to late game, will also remain extremely high priority in terms of canceling damage and also canceling some of the push that you get out of a lot of these mage supports or anything like this. So I think because of that, we'll still see like kind of a borderline engage meta, and obviously Rakan has always been the weird, like, this champion is disgusting, as if he's able to be played with champions that aren't just Xayah, which, like, again, they extended his shield range. If he's able to be played in that sense, then he will be played in mage metas, he will be played in tank metas, because he can do either really effectively. And he's just like the best engage. In the words of high elo EU player, EUS player Nick Elf, the problem with Alistar is that you can't go back out. Rakan does not have that problem, okay? So, by the way, if you have not watched Barcode AD and Nick Elf's high elo duo queue, it is by far the best League of Legends stream out there right now. The most hilarious shit. Anyway, please, back to the task at hand. I think that will be a big boon for Sword Art because he can play like all these champions. And it'll be a lot better off for Flash Wolves than it has been in the past. Okay, so that kind of opens that up. I will talk a little bit about Fnatic in Europe. And I think one thing that people will say about the European teams is that they will be the slower teams at the tournament in terms of game pace. And a lot of this comes down to the way that I think Europe thinks about lane priority. European teams do not do things without lane priority. So they will be very specific about securing it. And I would say, like, in that sense, NA is the antithesis of EU, because I feel like this is the region that's willing to give up way more lane push than almost any other major region at this event, is willing to give up way more lane priority to make sure they're the first to the objective. So if Dragon is going to spawn, NA will say, okay, I'm going to lose this wave mid, but I'm going to beat a Dragon first. I'm going to try to force a fight with the fact that I'm losing this wave mid, and I'm going to be okay with it. I feel like NA is way more likely to do that. EU is the least likely to do that. So that's kind of how I see this spectrum right now. So I would put Fnatic in that category. And because of that, I would say, like, the advantage of a player like Caps is that he will, if you roam without getting mid lane priority, you will almost always get like a better trade on the other side of the map, because he trades extremely well on like wave resets. So if both of you have your minions, okay, and Emily can't see this, but you can. You have your minions coming from the opposite sides of my screen. and my nose is the middle of the lane, okay? So, normally, you want, like, high wave clear mid champions to kind of kill these left minions here, and then my right hand has priority here. So then, if you roam on this, okay, like, EU teams will always want to roam on this. NA teams are okay roaming on this or on this. The opposite. So, the problem with roaming on this is that you lose an entire wave, and that doesn't just mean you lose an entire wave, it also means that the enemy team probably gets ship damage. They're more likely to get your mid lane turret faster, because when you get to lane, you'll be behind enemy mid laner, and you can't really contest them, so they can push into you a lot more. They're more likely to lose your turret, like, over time doing this type of thing. If you roam on this, okay, it means that either mid laner can roam. It's fine, no one's gonna lose anything or get an advantage either way from doing this. And, Paps is extremely good at using this to get a really good trade inside. If you go bot, he'll get a better trade top, like that kind of a mentality. So, however, you can easily counter Caps by making sure you always get this, so that he's never roaming, because he will not roam if you always are doing this before you roam. So that is the Fnatic explanation there. That is also why it feels like Fnatic play much slower.
How do you think, so just in general, how do you think the loss of, or, I mean, we're expecting Bwipo to play over sOAZ just because he's still recovering from his hand injury. So, how much do you think that'll affect their side lane pressure? Because I know previously, like, I've been really complimentary of their side lane pressure, and also just the fact that sOAZ, like, soaks up damage and attention like very few top laners, right? Like, he can still draw pressure even if he's getting pushed to turret and continuously dove, which allows Fnatic to do a lot of other things, especially if they want to play around bot side and reckless. So how much do you think that will affect them?
So it's weird, because I think that sOAZ is kind of, even after I give you this explanation, now that I've given you this explanation, it's way easier to understand, like, how I think about sOAZ. Because sOAZ surprises a lot of players in EU by caring less about kind of like the wave thing, but that's because he can identify when it's worth it, like, really, really well. Like, sOAZ knows that if he loses a wave, he has to make it really count. And he will do this by, like, forcing mid, or doing TB's bot, or anything like that. And the way that teams have kind of learned to deal with this is that you have to start to appreciate how sOAZ is thinking about the waves, and when it seems like it's worth for him, because once you can identify that, you can kind of predict when he'll make these roams, and you can really, really, really punish him for it. But for less experienced top laners in EU and stuff, this ends up being really successful for him, and this is like the advantage that he's always had, is like identifying these opportunities. Also, he's really good at knowing when the enemy jungler will come to his lane in general. And even if he's dying or something like this, he makes sure that team's not going to get an advantage out of this because of his position in the lane, right? Because, like, he has the creeps so that they have to push back the wave, and he'll be respawned by then, and he can make a play or something like this. So he's good at getting pressure, like you said, absorbing pressure in those terms very well. I think that Bwipo is not. And I think that if teams choose to play more to top side, that's something that we even saw in the EU final that's more effective. And again, like a pick like Tahm Kench is going to really matter, because if they go for Tahm Kench, like Fnatic go for Tahm Kench or something, they're going to shut down your ability to sort of play like stronger side lane picks or play hard to top. And so I think in Fnatic series, Tahm Kench is going to be a really contentious pick. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. Also, I do think it, so yeah, long story short, I do think it matters. Do I think it will cause them to end up significantly differently? It could cost them their ability to get to playoffs. I will say that, like, I I feel like they will have to, if they make playoffs, they'll have to play a tiebreaker to do it with Weibo, whereas I feel like they would probably make playoffs otherwise.
Okay.
What about you?
I mean, that sounds about right, because again, I default to you for Europe because that's pretty much the only time I can sleep. It's like right when EU is playing. But so I only watched like the latter half of their season and then like playoffs. But I would agree with that. I'm kind of wondering, I'm not sure when we're going to talk about them. I'm most curious about the EVOS Liquid matchup, but I'm also curious to see EVOS Fnatic, despite the fact that I think Fnatic have much better understanding of just basic like wave control and where you're applying pressure and that kind of stuff, just because not only do I think that EVOS will attack the top side, but just because that's what they do, right? Not even to single out Bwipo, but that's how they play, is they play around Yijin and Stark more than they play around their bot side. So, I mean, Fnatic would be able to get advantages from that anyway, but I'd be curious to see how that matchup goes just without sOAZ.
I do think because of the way that Fnatic play, all the stuff that I just outlined, that makes them way more susceptible to EVOS's kind of cheese than a lot of the other major region teams. They probably won't collapse unless they're certainly a priority, or they won't necessarily expect him to be doing like these weird invades. Actually, Fnatic's level 1s is something that they practice a lot. So if they go for something like an Ezreal Braum, they'll almost always invade level 1. So I can see that being an issue with so I can see them like kind of turning the tables on EVOS a bit, or turning the tables or making a trade for EVOS early on. But in general, I do think that Fnatic's probably the team most likely to lose games to EVOS in the playoffs. I mean, not playoffs,
in the group stage.
And that could again cost them playoffs. Anyway, did you want to talk about EVOS a little bit in terms of like...
Yeah,
because
sure.
we already talked about them a lot in the other episodes, but just a TLDR, I guess.
Yeah, so briefly, EVOS, they definitely play around topside. So the reason why I brought up the matchup with Fnatic was not actually to dunk on Bwipo, but the fact that they play around Stark. And they play, who you might remember from Gigabyte Marines last year, or they play around their jungler Yijin, who is basically like a fifth laner. Honestly, like that's how much resources the team gives him. That's how he sees the jungle matchup. It's a lot different than Levi or SFM, who people have been comparing him to, but I actually think he's quite different, and the way the team plays with him is quite different. But I do think EVOS don't show as strong of an understanding, just basic stuff like when to deny XP versus taking a turret, how to take advantage of when they do have a push in like a longer lane, or if they're trying to not necessarily freeze, but just get XP from a longer lane, they don't necessarily protect that, even if it is Stark and they're trying to play around him. They won't send Yijin to necessarily protect him. Just like basic stuff like that. And then they will almost always go for the fight. Like 99% of this time, this team will fight you before an objective. And if they set up an objective, it's primarily so that they can fight you. So I think that's something that, while it could catch some teams off guard, I do think that it's also exploitable in terms of if you just kind of hang back and set up for your objectives properly, or you punish them because they decide to siege a turret instead of denying you XP. I think that's another way that teams can definitely get ahead of EVOS. And you really just have to watch out for their team fighting and their aggression. But as long as that doesn't take you off guard, and the way they play around Yijin as basically more of a laner than even Slay, who is their AD, I think that, that it's something that's definitely exploitable by the major region teams. Like, I think teams like RNG, KingZone, they should be able to recognize how to punish that, especially when it comes to denying experience and setting up for neutral objectives with better vision and playing to their strengths on the map and where they have lane priority and that kind of thing, because these aren't things that EVOS necessarily does. So they leave a lot of opportunities open that I definitely don't think Supermassive took advantage of in their series. And in terms of how they represent Vietnam, they are still a very bloody team. However, they're actually slightly less bloody than the rest of their region.
Sure.
And they do like to set up a split rather than like, a lot of times when people think of fighty teams, they think of like just 5v5, like crazy brawls, etc., etc. But what EVOS actually like to do is they actually like to split with Stark. They almost set him up like rotating.
Occasionally. Sometimes they just group with Shen. Anyway,
that's true too. If he's on a split pusher like Camille, they basically
Shen
will
is
rotate.
Definitely a split pusher, but yes.
Yeah. If he's on something where he can split push, like how they like to play around with him with Camille is basically he and Yijin become like their AD carries, and they take down turrets. And they set up skirmishes. So that's another thing to watch out for. But again, I think teams that can set up either similar splits but better, like RNG, or just have overall better vision, neutral objective control, they definitely should be able to take advantage of that. But yeah, they're a scrappy team. They're always going to go for a fight, which is something that if it doesn't catch you off guard is another thing you can punish them for.
Yeah, sure. I think that's fair. So TLDR, crash a wave, ward, and beat EVOS. Okay. So,
like, just deny them XP because they leave a lot of opportunities open for you to do that.
So, now we can talk about teams that both of us watch actively and, like, constantly. So, let's start with Team Liquid. And I already kind of set up where I feel like North America is the region that is way more willing to give up lane priority to group. Like, I actually feel like this is the team fighting region more than almost any, because they will group mid quite a bit. They have way less interest in what their side lane waves are doing, and they, like, their mid laner and their top laner are way more willing to roam and make plays on bot if they will lose waves for it. So, do you think that that's a fair assessment, Team Liquid in comparison to, let's say, like RNG KingZone, at least? Or would you say something different?
No, I would agree with that. I think Team Liquid highly values having, despite the fact that you kind of talked about giving up mid priority to go for like a dragon or something like that, I do think Team Liquid highly values having control over mid, mainly because Xmithie is, how do I even describe Xmithie as jungler? It's always really difficult for me, but because he's not, I don't want to say like reactive, but in my opinion, his style is very focused on using his experience to do what he thinks would be like the correct thing in response to his opponent. And that actually has been, in my opinion, something that's been really good for Team Liquid this past split, even when they were having struggles, because he's very like even keeled, you know, like he's not going to do a lot of risky invades without vision, and he's not going to kind of cost you certain advantages that we sometimes see of, for example, if people would board against Ejin, I actually think he'd be caught up a lot more. Sure. But so that's when I look at Team Liquid, I kind of see Xmithie as like the center of the team almost. Sure. And then obviously they really like to play around facilitating double lift. And I think that
it's a
they like to group
thread for, I think,
double lift teams,
like Fnatic, Team Liquid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna like RNG. We're gonna see that a lot. I even think KingZone, to an extent, based on their final performance and the patch changes, we're gonna see more bot-centric play. But yeah. I would say Xmithie is kind of like the antithesis of Ejin in the sense that
that's actually a really good description.
He's the antithesis of Ejin in the sense that he's way more likely to be like, you know, you can have my top side camps, I'm gonna go bot and get double lift ahead, you know? I think that that's also kind of a mistake, because I think it's less efficient relative to some other junglers in the region, like Meteos. You can see my debate where I say Meteos is the best jungler in North American hit now. Yeah, so I think that it's a little inefficient, and I feel like Team Liquid is very much the self-sacrificing team in a lot of ways, where if they feel like a certain player, and it doesn't have to be double lift, is their win condition, the other players are really happy to give up stuff that they don't necessarily need to give up in order to make sure that player gets ahead. So that becomes like kind of their single-minded focus, and so I would apply that to Xmithie as well. Where he is going to be he's going to be leaving his camp himself open to counter jungling, or in order to make a play on a lane. So
yep, I'm looking forward to that EVOS Team Liquid matchup on the first day, just because you have a team that really loves to group mid and push mid and rotate. Like, they rotate double lift to take objectives, but they also just love grouping and forcing mid. And then you have EVOS, who like does not pay attention to the mid lane whatsoever and just rotates Stark to side lanes. And so I'm curious. I want to see that matchup. I want to see how it pans out.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like you're just going to have like Team Liquid will get permanent mid lane priority, but
yeah, the map is gonna it's gonna be like Team Liquid like this, but then EVOS like weird inverted thing.
It's really weird how that's gonna work, because the lane pressure is just so intertwined, right? And it's so easy to lose control of Baron if you don't have control of like any one lane, basically. Unless you're coordinating push across lanes, I think it becomes very difficult for you. So it might come down to, if EVOS gets gets both sides, they'll just collapse on mid with it, or they'll threaten towers and Team Liquid have to react and give up mid prio, and then EVOS get Baron off of that, or yeah, I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah, it's a weird matchup. So that's kind of on the first day. That's actually one of the ones that I'm looking forward to the most. I know that's kind of a bizarre matchup to look forward to, but just because of the way both teams play is just so radically different. The way they see the map is so radically different from each other that I want to see how that matchup ends up working out.
And I do think, like you mentioned Xmithie again, I think the thing that's about Xmithie for me is just really how much he controls Team Liquid's team fights. If he has an engaged champ like Sejuani or something, like he's really good at setting up those types of fights, which is why I think like Team Liquid's ability to get mid control and get vision around Baron is like really their strength. So that's kind of how I see this happening. And it's just really difficult because I do think that the way that NA approaches controlling minion waves is pretty flawed. But there are a lot of things to like about Team Liquid, I think. So
yeah, I mean, I think I like how Pobelter and Xmithie work together, especially in the final. I thought they were really good in terms of, I think kind of what you talked about, like controlling it and then setting up for neutral objectives.
It's so weird though, because sometimes they do just like give up mid waves and then go for objectives anyway. So I don't know. Like, I think they miss the control mid step sometimes when it's during laning phase. So at least,
yeah.
But in mid to late game, I think that they're pretty good with it. Yeah.
Yeah. For TL, the big thing for me is that when this team was initially winning in the first part of the season, I was very skeptical about how they'd be able to continue winning because they were really just relying on like getting good matchups and pushing and not really communicating with each other very well. And so when they'd get ahead, they'd just like stomp and everyone was like, oh my god, this team is amazing. But they didn't really have good communication, I don't think, between the lanes themselves, and also Xmithie sometimes looked out of sync with the rest of the team as well. And I think if there's one thing that I want to give them credit to, it's that they seem to have improved that communication significantly by the final. So yeah, I do think that is like markedly improved from what I saw from them at the beginning of the split.
And since I think of all teams in terms of pushing waves and what happens, we'll say Fnatic is the team that is willing to say, okay, maybe you force on bot and get a couple kills on our bot lane, but we're going to get chip damage on both of your solo lane towers, and we're going to get like waves up on our laners, and that will pay off as the game progresses, right? For your trade bot or something like this. So that's like more European Fnatic mindset. Team Liquid are going to be like, yeah, we're going to give up mid top waves to make sure our bot gets ahead or something like this, or just a lane gets ahead. Sometimes they'll do it for impact too, or even Pobelter. But so that'll be like the Team Liquid approach. Now we get to China, which I consider like we roam on priority, and it's like we don't care about priority, and China's like we roam on reset. And the better player is gonna fucking beat you up. Anyway, so RNG, a big problem with like taking the strong LPL teams in the context of their region is that a lot of times you aren't seeing that trade being made, right? When the teams are very likely to make plays on wave resetting and like going bottom, and then the enemy laners will just match the play on the wave reset, and then they'll say, okay, we're not going to necessarily lose, no one's necessarily losing anything in the lane for this, however one of us will be objectively better in that bottom lane fight just based on our champion and our level advantage or whatever else, and the position of our jungler, a bunch of other things that you can know before you teleport, by the way, and they opt into it anyway because they think they can outplay, or I'm not exactly sure why. And then so teams with better laning champions end up getting much more significant leads because they're not making trades for that kind of setup in the early game. So that's why I say like take dominant teams like IG, dominant teams like RNG with a grain of salt in this context. Because it's insanely easy to snowball your lead in the LPL when no one is trying to make a trade. But I think that RNG are a little bit better at that, and that's one of the advantages that they had over IG in the series. I also think that RNG are one of the best like teams in terms of mid to late 1-3-1 setups.
Yes.
So not just grouping and 5v5ing, but making sure you're coordinating the waves across top, mid, and bottom lane when you're doing sieges, so that they're crashing at the same time, and the enemy team has to split up and decide like which turrets to defend. So for me, I think that's like probably RNG's primary strength among everything else. I also think RNG are really weird in the sense that they care more about drafting for like some compositional ideal than necessarily their lane matchups. I don't know if you've noticed this. Like the first game of the final is a primary example where it's like, oh, that Camille Morgue comp, like it's kind of a cute idea, but
yeah,
you guys are just gonna get run over in laning fights, by the way. And then you have like Camille Morgue, Zach, and like in theory, this team fight setup is really interesting, right? But
I just love that they save all of these experimental comps for Karsa and then swap him out. Like, I know that's terrible to say, but like they do it all. But like, it's a constant thing, and I don't know if it's because Karsa is a more stable jungler than MLXG, which kind of makes sense. If you want someone who's a little bit more reliable, you'd probably want to experiment. You'd want to test out the experimental composition with the more reliable, stable jungler, but not one that sacrifices camps constantly to like be in lane and fall levels behind. But if there's one thing I just want to reiterate about RNG is that yes, they are not like this crazy 5v5 team. Like if you want a team like that, look at EVOS past like a certain point in the game. But RNG are actually set up a very controlled 1-3-1.
I would say Liquid and Fnatic for me are both more 5v5 oriented teams than RNG. RNG do 5v5 pretty well though. But
yeah. Oh yeah. No, I'm not saying like their 5v5 is bad. Mm-hmm. It's good, but it's like that's not their. I feel like their ideal is to set up that pressure and then just kind of push their opponents off the map slowly. Obviously, when everyone looks at this team, they're going to talk about UZI. I think Xiaohu is super important to how this team works because he's basically the pivot point for everything that RNG wants to do. And so that's super important. I kind of wish, I know they brought Karsa and MLXG. I kind of wish they brought both top laners instead because I actually think another really underrated thing about what RNG has been doing this split is rotating between Let Me and Zatai and using them to apply pressure in different ways. So that is kind of sad, although I do understand that MLXG is very volatile, and while he has taken people by surprise on international stages multiple times because they're not expecting a jungler to eschew early camps for like a level 2 gank, which is like the MLXG special. I think that having a more stable, traditionally minded jungler in Karsa, like I guess I can understand why they made that decision, but it is kind of sad that we won't be able to see how RNG added kind of a new dimension of flexibility to how they set up the 1-3-1 and swapping between Zatai and Let Me, because I think that was something that's really interesting to watch them grow and evolve throughout the split. I mean, I'm trying to think of what else. Like, MLXG is pretty much the same to me, in my opinion. I'm not like as high on him as other people are. I know a lot of people come in and see him at international competitions and they're like, damn, this kid is amazing. And he's
semi-similar to Ejin, I guess, except Ejin plays much more to his own advantages than MLXG is much more for his laner's advantages.
Yeah, MLXG is always for his laners.
He's like a less logical version of Xmithie.
He will give up like multiple camps and leave himself completely open for counter jungling if it means like, that he can.
Why are we losing this level 10 skirmish? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe because you're 2 levels down.
He will be regularly like 2 levels down from his jungle opponent if he can manage to get Xiaohu ahead or if he can manage to get Uzi ahead.
You just gotta. So if I get Xiaohu 2 levels ahead, but I'm 2 levels behind, the math works out, right? It's the way that works. Okay. I mean, the way that I think about RNG at Worlds, because a lot of people thought like, okay, Ardent, very UZI centric, but the thing is that in laning phase they played for mid advantages, and then they would have like really strong side lane pressure oriented mids. So something like Jace, they played Jace in the G2 game, for example, or something of that nature, and then they would make sure that they could get side lane pressure with Xiaohu, because he would always like out have an advantage on whoever he was laning against inside, and then because he drew so much pressure aside, UCI could just soft reset mid lane without overextending and getting caught out. Because a big problem with, again, I think EU teams is the way that they look at they get in mid to late, they get mid priority first, and then they get side priority. Whereas I feel like the better approach is making sure you're getting your side priority, moving enemy team away from mid, and then like soft resetting the mid wave and getting Baron vision off of that. So anyway, because otherwise it's just super easy to collapse on enemy team, and you can't make 1-3-1 comps work if you're getting mid priority first. And if you're playing around your AD carry and you want your AD carry to be safe, you don't want him to be overextending mid anyway. So yeah, that's kind of how I think of RNG in terms of like how I would describe why Xiaohu is super important to that team. The difference between Zatai and Let Me is an interesting one. It's funny because I talked to Twitter and Weibo, like Weibo with Chinese fans and Twitter with obviously English speaking fans. And I asked the same question, like, who do you think they should have taken as sub? And Twitter fans obviously want to see Karsa. Weibo fans were very surprised that Karsa is coming instead of taking Let Me and Zatai as the official subs. I personally mark that down to, obviously Chinese fans have watched more LPL, but than some of my Twitter followers. But I'm not really sure. I also like Emily. She has a very, very, very vocal,
strong fan following.
Chinese fan following. Yeah, so that's the other thing.
He's like insanely popular.
Yep.
In China, yeah.
But it's interesting to me. I wouldn't even say like I think a lot of people boil it down to with Let Me they play like more team fighting. With Zatai they play more 1-3-1. I don't even think that's true. I think the way that they execute their 1-3-1 is different. When they have Zatai and Let Me. Like when they have Zatai, it's much more Zatai is going to generate pressure on his own and will like force them to choose between collapsing on Zatai or going for Baron, and baiting Baron in that sense. With Let Me, it's more like, okay, Let Me's getting side priority really hard. We're going to use jungle and Xiaohu to shadow Let Me and kill the enemy side laner. I think is much more how they play with Let Me. So they're more likely to play like around Let Me, whereas Zatai they rely on to get his own pressure kind of in his awkward Zatai sort of way. So that's how I mean,
he's toned it down a bit.
Like, how do you think that that's fair? Like, how do you see the difference between these two top laners?
No, I think that's fair. I think Zatai is a lot more the kind of top laner that is almost always going to have a target on his back because of the way he plays. He's a lot more about like trading in a 1v1 or a 2v2 if the junglers are up there, or even a 2v1 if it's like a mismatch. He's a lot more about trading in lane. He's a lot more about, I don't want to say like killing his laning opponent because that's kind of how he used to be, but he's evolved just into always having some sort of threat. Even if he's behind, I feel like you still have to respect the fact that he is always looking for that one opportunity to kind of go in for a favorable trade. And that's not as much of how Let Me plays. Let Me plays more for like standard laning pressure and lane priority. Obviously, a lot of people will probably look at the champion choices as well and say like, oh, we're going to see more tank tops because Let Me is here. And since Zatai is not here, we're not going to see stuff like the Camille or whatever. But I do think that that has a lot to do with it, just in terms of how Zatai sees a lane.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's because he obviously used to be mid laner. For people who don't know, or maybe haven't watched him, he's been around for forever. He sees it more as like a 1v1 duel than a lot of top laners I know. So, or not know, but you know, a lot of top laners I watch.
I think that suits him more
that's
for
the
the top
primary
lane
difference.
role ultimately, is because you can play it more as 1v1 than mid, which is what he was trying to do all the time.
Yeah.
But,
well, and as the game has evolved through the years, it actually is kind of a natural transition, because mid is more of a control point now instead of a 1v1 like volatile, you know, kind of we're going to duel each other, we're going to beat each other, whereas top lane is a lot more for duelists. And that's kind of how I describe Zatai's style. Like, he is a duelist. He's going to draw pressure. He's always going to have some sort of kill threat, even if he's behind. And he's also really smart about how he plays when teams are trying to dive him, because he also soaks pressure really well. And then, yeah, with Let Me, it's more about establishing lane priority and setting up waves in the side lanes before rotating to another lane or grouping in like 2 or 3 to try to go after an opponent if they're trying to set up split pressure. And he doesn't have the same kill pressure in lane, but he's also I guess more,
he's more,
I don't even want to say more steady, but yeah.
He's less all or nothing, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
It's the thing about Let Me is that I think he just understands. I also think he understands like the flow of waves a lot better than Zatai, so that's an advantage that he will just have over that guy. So I can kind of see, like, I think long term jungle is a really, really difficult position to rotating roster, because a lot of it relies on the rhythm of the game, like understanding how your laners want to play. So you almost always see it takes like an entire split for a more cerebral jungler to really get used to his team and to really start to synergize and click. Like, I think that position is so hard to rotating roster because of that. But maybe long term, you'll have a better rotating setup between like She and Karsa, who have like more defined strengths and weaknesses. But short term, I feel like they have a better handle on how they play with Zatai versus how they play with Let Me.
No, that makes sense.
But Let Me, I think objectively, is kind of a better player, as much as I love Zatai.
I think he has a better understanding of waves. I also think he has a better understanding of how to kind of position himself in a team fight when he's grouping. I think his zone control is better than Zatai's.
And obviously, everyone was so happy for UZI to win his first LPL championship, but this guy, Zatai, has been in the LPL since the LPL was a thing, and he's literally one of the only ones left. And he's also been around before the LPL, and this was also his first LPL championship, I will have you know. So congratulations to Zatai.
What number is he?
Huh?
Because Kid was like, in terms of their numbers, right? Because it was him, Kid, and Clear Love. Yeah. No, their numbers on the server, I think.
Oh.
Because they were all initially.
I think
anyway, it's like a tangent.
I think they were more talking about like number of games in the LPL rather than numbers on the server. Because those are the 3 longest standing players who have been in every split of the LPL, basically. Cool also, technically, because now he's coming back. But
woo!
Without Cool, who's been sort of in and out anyway, it's only those 2 left. But I actually think it's weird that you say that we'll see more tanks, because like in playoffs, Let Me played, in terms of like tanks, I would say he played 4 tanks, like Orange Cho'Gath. and then everything else should primarily be in a side lane. He played like Shen, Ryze, Camille, Gnar, Vladimir. Especially with Gnar being like Rage Blade build Gnar now is like the best Gnar build. He's way more of a duelist champion. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, but so for me it's like weird to hear him referred to as a primarily tanked player when I've never really thought of him that way. I think he's like an extremely versatile player, and he ends up not being the primary. The only time he was really the primary, they played a lot around top in spring of last year. Like they played a lot around top last spring, in 2017 spring. But they always will play way more to UCI's lane, and he's on their roster. Because obviously UCI only has one speed. I will trade, by the way. If there is a minion or a trade opportunity, I will trade.
It's like Zatai, but then ramped up to like 20. Yeah.
Yeah, before we'll talk about KingZone and then we'll ask the question that most people care about. But first, let's talk about KingZone. So, KingZone Dragon X, which you should say that name in full at every opportunity the way Papa Xmithie does. I just love listening to him cast, and it's like, KingZone Dragon X!
KingZone Dragon X, yeah.
Has got that? No, okay. How would you break down this team? Like, what makes them unique from your perspective? In the context of all the stuff that we've talked about already.
So for me, I think a lot of people, when they look at this team, they see Peanut, they see Khan, they see BDD. But for me, this team is actually really starts with Prey and Gorilla. I think it was last year that they described themselves as the legs of the team. Sure. In terms of their like when the team stands up, they're the ones at the bottom, kind of holding the rest of the team up as like a foundation almost.
And if they falter, the entire thing comes tumbling down.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
We saw at Worlds. Continue.
No, I think so. That's actually what I focus on when I look at this team. Is I focus on just how stable this bot lane is. So even when they're not specifically playing with the bot lane focus, and obviously that's why you do see a lot of people being like, you know, Khan is amazing because they'll play around him, or they'll play around BDD's mid pressure with BDD and Peanut, who, although they didn't synergize right away in the beginning, are a lot stronger now together as a mid jungle 2v2, especially in this meta, where you can pick a lot of aggressive junglers and then have BDD warding for Peanut so he can go for some of those more aggressive invades. But I think really for me, KingZone is still all about their bot lane just because they're so reliable. They rarely, like if you were talking about Uzi and how he like always goes for the trade, Prey and Gorilla are really smart about how they trade. They understand how to control their wave really well. They understand, I think, when to trade with their opponents and when it's probably not as good of an idea. So they're not a very volatile lane. And it's just everything about this team for me starts with their bottom lane. Now, I think, again, especially in this meta, their bot lane is probably going to take a little bit more focus because previously I think people were looking at Peanut, they were looking at BDD, they were looking at Khan because Khan is another kind of heavy duelist. He's going to draw a lot of pressure. He's going to go for a lot of those trades, however risky. And now that we saw them in the finals, I think you did see a slight shift more towards the team itself focusing on bottom lane, because obviously they picked Kaisa for Prey. I don't think that will actually go through. But what I do think you might see is I actually think you could see Prey stepping out on the Ashe, especially if they also ban Varus, which is another really strong champion for Prey because his initiation sense is really good. And also since more tanky initiators are currently in the support meta, we talked about this with Sword Art, but Gorilla is another support that does really well on those champions, almost as a follow-up engage to something for Prey, or even if BDD is kind of initiating a team fight, you'll see Gorilla follow up, or the other way around, where Gorilla will initiate on something like Alistar, and then BDD and Prey will follow up with CC. Especially if Prey again is on the Varus or on Ashe, which was kind of his signature champion for years, just because his arrows and his vision control of that champion is just insane. There's no other player in the world who plays Ashe like Prey does, and in terms of how much value he brings to his team on that champion. But yeah, I mean, I think you saw a slightly different KingZone in the finals in terms of the fact that they did have a slightly more bot side focus, even though you saw like Khan bring out the Jace. BDD on Talia is something that they like to do to have additional side wave control, so they can basically have BDD push up for Peanut, but then he can affect the side lanes as well. And then obviously a lot of people are probably going to be talking about Khan. They're also going to be talking about Peanut, because this is a really strong meta for him, in my opinion, because he can go on champions like the Olaf still, or more aggressive, invade-heavy junglers. And since he's now, in my opinion, working with BDD a lot better, he's able to have a pretty strong vision net in order to do that as well, especially if BDD is able to get that initial push in mid. And then he can choose to go topside, or he can choose to go bot side. So all in all, I think this iteration of KingZone is more flexible than the team that we saw at the World Championship, but they still operate in a very similar way, if that makes sense. Like, they have more flexibility, especially in the current meta, because they can play around the jungle mid 2v2 really well. But I also think that, for me, everything starts with that bot lane, and it's just super important. And if teams are going to try to destabilize KingZone, I do think you really want to attack that bot lane.
For me, what makes KingZone a better team now than Longju at last year's Worlds is that they are way more likely to use side pressure to group than they were last year. They're way more likely to have Khan like get the wave to push to enemy turret and then group, and then have BDD do the same thing and then group, and then make this more about, like, it's like they're acknowledging the advantages of their bot lane finally, and playing way more to them in team fights and stuff. And I think that it's also partly meta, because even though you say, like, okay, Ardent was hugely influential, it wasn't necessarily, like, this is more of a 2-item AD meta because of the way Gwynzo's is. This is like a 2-item AD meta. You have, obviously, your Caitlyn's, but Caitlyn is like a bit of an anomaly because she has a super strong laning phase and a super strong 3-item. But her 2-item, her in-between is awkward. So that's Caitlyn's biggest weakness. But I think if you can make a 2-item AD comp work, then 2-item ADs are just going to be better. And that's because that's when the first Baron spawns at 2 items for your AD carry and everything else. So that also makes it a very much Prey-centric meta, because a lot of 2-item ADs also have engaged tools like Varus, or do extremely well in lane on their own. So, like Jhin, Varus, like these types of ADs. And so you're in a position where they play much more to that and forcing fights at 2 items. I think that they're less of a 1-3-1 comp team, ironically, than RNG now at this point. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I would agree, actually. Because I think their focus is more to push up lanes and then either group with the bot lane or again, like a lot of their MO last year was kind of sending Khan out in a 4-1. And they still do that sometimes, but I think, to your point, they group with him a lot more. So even if he is in a 4-1 setup, instead of maybe pressuring down a turret, they might group to take a better objective, or group to collapse on their opponents in a team fight, something like that.
And in this sense, it's interesting because they play less significantly around top. Like, they will still play around top lane, obviously, and if they don't, like, I feel like Khan ints and lane way more. That's still true. Like, that was always true, is that Khan will have a bad laning phase unless jungle is playing to his side, pretty much, because he's like the Uzi of top lane. That's
a pretty good way of putting it. Yeah, like if he sees a trade that he thinks he can win, he will go for it.
And so if enemy jungle happens to be nearby, it's like, fuck. But KingZone are also really good at setting their wave in top because of that, because of how focused Khan is on like those types of trades, so that when the jungle is top, if you do not dodge like this top lane CC, you know the jungler is there. Like, if you do not dodge this CC, you know you're gonna die because the jungler is there, you know? Like, they're very good at that type of coordination. However, they're playing less just specifically around Khan's lane, and so he'll have like a worse laning phase now. But because of the way they've transitioned into Khan being able to like reset the wave and then group mid, or get side lane priority and then group mid, they care less if he's like 0-3 on Graves or something, on Jace or something, in mid game. But and that's again what makes their bot lane stand out as the core. Obviously, BDD becomes way more important because I think that KingZone also understand tempo jungle way better than the other teams in this tournament. Like, that's why Olaf is always going to be a good pick. They will get way more out of Olaf than most of the teams here. I think RNG can do something similar, but they have to actually draft for that, and they don't always draft for that. It's not as important to them. It's not like as much about their identity. So they're not as good at it, also by that caveat. So like, those for me are kind of the defining things about KingZone, is like how important it is for them to have mid push so that they can use tempo advantage on jungle. And then 2-item AD spike. I don't know. Like, for me, that's kind of how I think of that team now. I don't know. Any additional thoughts on KingZone?
No. I mean, I think I said my piece in terms of how they're better. Like, I don't think it's not as easy as saying Cuz was bad and Peanut is good. Yeah. I think it's a lot of different factors, and obviously having Peanut helps significantly, but it's a lot of different factors. I would actually consider Khan, despite the fact that, especially towards the end of the split, he hasn't been like as flashy as he used to be. But I actually think he's improved a lot, especially
he can actually flank in teamfights. Yes.
His flanks, yeah. They've improved like a lot more, where I think previously they would give him a lot of attention and they would stick him in a side lane because they knew that his flank or his group might not be the best, but now he's become a lot more reliable and flexible player, in my opinion. And that is also something that I think has worked really well for this team. So yeah, that's also something to look out for, because I actually think Khan is a better player than he was last year.
Yeah, I think I would say probably a defining thing is because they had a lot of young players last year. They were confined in how they had to play, because their players had very obvious weaknesses they needed to work on. And so they were a bit restricted. So I didn't, like, a lot of people tried to set up Longju as this team that played the way they did because they could get away with it because they were that good. But I felt more like, okay, they have to make this work, you know? And they can make this work because their bot lane is super flexible, even if their laners, their mid and top aren't. But now I think that they're improving a lot and becoming like way more fleshed out as players, and so they can change up how they want to play a lot more. So who is the best AD carry at the tournament, Emily Rand?
Oh God, I would say Prey.
Same.
It's always Prey for me. I'm sorry, who's the eye?
It's like I'm so boring because I'm always gonna say Bjergsen is the MVP of NA, and I'm always gonna say Prey is the MVP of Korea, so it's just whatever, like but it's not, it hasn't changed, guys. Prey is still the best. I said Prey was the best in 2016, Prey is still the best. So
yeah. It's Prey.
I mean, I think UZI is really good, obviously, and it's weird because every year I say this guy is better, you know? And he is. Like, UZI is insanely good right now. But
he's also apparently,
Prey is
I think,
like one with the game. He's just he sees
Prey is like next
the Ash
level.
Arrow opportunity on the other side of the map. He can do whatever he has to do. He's like his sick positioning in team fights. I don't know. It'll be really fun because I think Kaisa being so disgusting is going to make this tournament really interesting with the ADs, I hope. Actually, you know what? Screw that champion. I hope it's banned every game.
I mean, I don't see a lot of teams risking giving it up, to be honest. But we'll see. She got through a few times in playing. I don't know if that's because people thought they could deal with it, or like Afrika gave it to Prey for 4 games because they thought they could deal with it.
I think so there are a couple of things about Kaisa. One is the existence of Morg makes her really annoying because Kaisa shouldn't get push in most of her lane matchups. She has really good like level 3 all-in, so you have to play carefully around that, and if you screw that up, then she can get push. But she shouldn't get push in most matchups, but Morg is safe, has engage, and will get push in most cases. So that champion sucks. And But if you don't, like, if they have the Morgana option, for example, so if you see Kaisa picked, like, you pick Morgana, then you should be able to get priority in your bot lane. So then you pick a tempo jungle, and you make sure you deny enemy jungle with bot priority, because Kaisa won't get bot priority. And that's basically the way that you play around and shut down Kaisa, so I think KingZone can do it. Eventually RNG can do it, because they'll just play around bot anyway. They'll play around Pyro bot anyway, and they'll use like a tempo jungler pretty well. Maybe Flash Wolves?
I was gonna say I don't have enough. I was looking at all of the teams, and I'm like, so Flash Wolves, Sword Art can definitely get the bot prio against Kaisa, and in terms of their warding patterns. Yeah, that's the problem. They're mid.
He's not gonna deny enemy jungle, so.
But
I mean, Ejin will just do it
mid.
even if his bot doesn't have prios, so I guess there's that. Kaisa's irrelevant.
EVOS locks in Kaisa for Stark and just rotates him around.
More Kaisa.
Hey, if that happens, I called it for
God. Kaisa top. No, actually, tank top, okay? If you play tank top in solo queue, ban Kaisa every time, because that is super annoying for tanks. Like, Kaisa is such an annoying champion to deal with as a tank, so I'm not gonna say it is gonna happen, but, you know, maybe if the games get a little weird.
Well, if any team would try it, I don't even think EVOS would try it, to be quite honest. But
I don't think it'll happen.
I think they'd probably just give it to Slay if it even got through. But yeah,
and part of the thing that makes her so oppressive is her passive, which you can only really fully utilize with CC support anyway. So
yeah.
That was a fun time. So do we think the teams kind of go out do we have like a rough order? I know you did the ESPN article, but I guess the biggest question is like, is KingZone gonna finish first, and EU or NA?
EU or NA is really weird to me.
Yeah.
The only reason I argued for TL slightly above Fnatic, because like, so if you're referencing the ESPN power rankings, if we did tiers, I would like put them side by side. The only reason I put TL above was because at that time I didn't even know sOAZ was going. They actually announced that after.
Mm-hmm.
Because I actually value sOAZ that highly, like just his ability to draw pressure and also like absorb pressure so that Fnatic can do something else on the map while he is getting dove top. I value that really highly. In terms of, do I think these teams can beat KingZone in a best of 5? That is the huge stretch for me. So it's not even like you could tell me anything happens in the group stage.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even care.
And I would probably believe you because it's a best of 1.
I'm not even gonna bother with group stage, like, strict, like, in-depth predictions, because they're gonna be wrong. Like, fuck it, whatever.
Yeah, that's what always happens. In terms of how I think teams will go out, I'm still not sold. So I think EVOS will go out. I do think they'll be able to take a game or two, but I just don't see this team. I just think their macro and their understanding
their cheese is not as smart as Gigabyte Marines' cheese. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and if you want to compare Gigabyte Marines to EVOS, like, their jungler is also not as smart, in my opinion. And the way they play around Yijin and Stark is interesting to watch, and I think it's unique. But I also think that they give up a lot on the map to do it, and smarter teams are going to be able to take advantage of that. So while I can see them taking games in best of 1s, actually I'll be surprised if they don't win at least one or two games. But I do see them falling out. I also don't have a lot of faith in Flash Wolves, to be honest, despite the fact that they looked so dominant against Gambit. I think Sword Art is still in an awesome meta, but for as much as we talked about them, Mugen is too passive for me, and I also think that the Flash Wolves, I'm still not sold on their mid to late game, despite the fact that coming out of this matchup that we saw this morning, I think a lot of people are like, they finally figured it out. It's like, I don't think they actually have. So that's an issue for me with Flash Wolves in terms of looking whether they're going to go. So I think the first two teams to be eliminated before playoffs are still going to be EVOS and Flash Wolves. And then in terms of for the rest of it, it's who can beat KingZone in a best of 5, and I honestly don't see any of these teams being able to do it. It's also, so like, not only are KingZone just strong, but I know we stressed this when we talked about them, because we talked about them for quite a bit. It's just a really good meta for them. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they are slightly more flexible than what we saw of Longzhu last year, I just think that this is a meta where they can really take it and run with it, and I don't see other teams being able to beat them in a best of 5 based on what I've seen from all of these teams this past split. If I had to pick one team to do it in a best of 5, it would probably be RNG. Okay. Like, maybe they could set up a good enough 1-3-1 split, and then maybe you'd have like one of their junglers somehow being able to hold Peanut down, but that's a really big stretch for me. Just because over a best of 5, I think KingZone would still be able to adapt and adjust and shut that down. But that's just me. My South Korean bias is showing.
Sure. I think there are a couple of weird incidental things. One is that obviously sOAZ is not playing. The other one is that RNG just got their visas approved and are just only just
I saw
now.
sucks.
Making it to Berlin, so at least in terms of understanding whatever the scrim meta is that has already been like being practiced by the other MSI teams, they're gonna be a little out of the loop. So that's concerning. I'm worried that we're gonna get another classic Young Buck vacation, kind of, out of Fnatic as well. So those are slight concerns. For me, so
I totally forgot about that, actually, to be quite honest.
The RNG thing, yeah. Like we talked.
No, not the RNG. I mean, I did.
Oh, the Young Buck
I did want to bring that up at some point, but the Young Buck thing, I totally forgot about that.
I guess they've technically been in Korea, but I don't necessarily think they've been scrimming, because who would they be scrimming really in Korea? Other than maybe other EU teams or other NA teams that are boot camping. But
yeah, I was gonna say there are a few teams boot camping, and then maybe depending on when they were there.
But my understanding is Reckless was basically just there playing solo queue also. Like it wasn't even the whole team. So I'm not really sure what the deal is with Fnatic either. But so this is my slight concern with those two teams. Is it enough to say that Flash Wolves or EVOS will get out over Fnatic or Team Liquid or RNG? I don't see, like, I think Flash Wolves are actually objectively a worse team than last year. But at the same time, I think that they could perform better just because this is Sword Art's meta.
Yeah, I can do that.
So I'm gonna say no, but like at the same time, it's just there's so much weird shit happening that I'm not gonna say that it's impossible, you know. So
yeah, I think it's gonna be really difficult for EVOS to get out. To be honest, like, just because again. I know I keep harping on this, but they just leave so many openings for other teams to take advantage of.
And even Gigabyte Marines, which I feel like was a stronger representative just in terms of a bunch of different factors, didn't make it out of group stage in either MSI or Worlds.
Yeah, and I would rate Gigabyte Marines ahead of EVOS in terms of understanding, even in terms of like flexibility and how they can take teams by surprise. I actually think Gigabyte Marines were also more flexible in that regard as well. So that's another reason why I see it hard for EVOS to get out. Flash Wolves are always kind of that weird team where sometimes they sneak in, but it's like I get so
much in terms of like understanding vision control just from watching Flash Wolves games, though, is the thing that I'll always like kind of go home on. And
I think for me, it's whether they can transfer those early advantages into an actual win, though, which is always their issue. And like always their issue.
So many times they don't even get that anymore. So yeah, I don't see either EVOS or Flash Wolves making playoffs. Under normal circumstances, I think it's possible for Flash Wolves given some of the weird, like, external factors. But, yeah, I'm gonna say that if this were a perfect world, I'd put, like, RNG and Fnatic below. I'd go KingZone, RNG, Fnatic, TL.
If sOAZ was playing, that's how I'd rank them as well. Yeah.
With sOAZ not playing, it's still really difficult for me to say, just because I think that the way that TL approached stuff is still insanely exploitable, just in terms of making smart trades. But I will say that, yeah, I think Team Liquid take it without sOAZ. So do we have predictions for first day? Because this is kind of fun. Like
best first day.
I'm not gonna do this like super in depth, like explain your answer, Emily. We're just gonna do a quick fire just because I think it's fun, and then if there's something we want to talk about, we'll talk about that. So day one, first game is Fnatic RNG. What do you think?
I'm still going to give it to RNG. I won't be shocked if Fnatic take this, especially given RNG's circumstances, but yeah.
I'm going to go RNG. Just because both of these teams, I'm not even sure if they prepped super in depth. Based on listening to the Euphoria podcast, I don't know if Young Buck or Buipo have watched an RNG game. We're just going to throw that out there. EVOS versus Flash Wolves. Thoughts?
Flash Wolves.
Okay. I'm going to say EVOS win the first game, and Flash Wolves win the second game between these two. Okay. KingZone versus Team Liquid.
KingZone.
Yeah, same. Flash Wolves versus Fnatic.
Fnatic.
Yeah, same. EVOS versus Team Liquid.
This would be my big upset, right? Because I actually think... this is the game I'm looking forward to the most, and people are going to be like, why? Because really it should be RNG KingZone, right? But it's TL EVOS. Because of that weird, just the way they both see the game is completely different. I think TL are a better team than EVOS, but I think this is one on the first day. I think EVOS actually might win this.
See, I think I think NA like show up strong. You know, historically, like NA teams will show up strong. First part. But I think they could lose second round to EVOS. So I'm gonna go like the opposite of the Flash.
So yeah, I'm taking the reverse. I'm taking they beat EVOS the second time, but they lose the first time.
Yeah, I think that TL beat EVOS first time, lose to EVOS second time. So, maybe depends. I can change my predictions because we're only doing day one. RNG versus KingZone.
KingZone.
Yeah. Okay. So pretty much the only thing we disagreed on was the EVOS games.
Yeah.
We went the opposite way on both of the EVOS games. So, there we go, guys. Flame us, whatever. Hope you guys enjoyed the hour and a half of random babbling. Actually, 2 hours in total if you count the...
If you include the first one, yeah. People are lucky we're splitting this up.
So, yeah. Good time. We'll be like I said, I staggered the release of these, so it's all good.